Every night the leopard visited the cow. People were shocked when they found out the reason. The Montana sky stretched vast and endless above the rolling hills of the Crazy Mountains, a canvas of deep blue brushed with streaks of fiery orange and gold as the sun began its slow descent. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of pine and sage, a familiar and comforting aroma to Margaret Holden. At 68, her life was as interwoven with the rhythms of this land as the roots of the ancient ponderosa pines that dotted her ranch. The Rocking H, as her late husband, Samuel, had christened it, wasn't a sprawling empire of cattle and cowboys. It was a modest operation, a few hundred acres of pastureland nestled in a valley, where Margaret ran a small herd of Hereford cattle. It was a hard life, demanding physical labor and unwavering dedication, but it was her life, the life she'd chosen, the life she loved. Samuel had been gone for 5 years, taken by a sudden heart attack while mending fences on a crisp autumn morning. The loss had left a gaping hole in Margaret's world, a silence that echoed through the ranch house and across the wide-open spaces. But she persevered, driven by a stubborn streak of independence and a deep-seated love for the land. She'd learned to handle the chores herself, relying on the occasional help of neighbors and a hired hand, a young man named Cody, who came by a few days a week. Her most cherished companion, her constant solace, was a cow named Buttercup. Buttercup wasn't just any cow, she was a gentle, sweet-natured Hereford, with a creamy white face and a rich, reddish-brown coat. Samuel had given her to Margaret as a calf, a birthday present, years ago. He'd said her gentle eyes and placid demeanor reminded him of Margaret. Buttercup had been Samuel's favorite, and now, she was Margaret's. Buttercup was more than just livestock, she was a pet, a friend, a living link to Margaret's past. She would often follow Margaret around the ranch yard, nudging her hand with her soft nose, seeking a scratch behind the ears or a handful of sweet feed. In the evenings, Margaret would often sit on the porch swing, watching Buttercup graze in the pasture, finding comfort in her quiet presence and the familiar rhythm of her chewing, in the gentle swish of her tail. The ranch was a peaceful place, but it wasn't without its challenges. The weather could be harsh, the winters long and brutal, the summers hot and dry. Predators were a constant concern. Coyotes, wolves, and, occasionally, mountain lions roamed the surrounding hills, always a potential threat to the livestock. Margaret was well aware of the risks. She kept a rifle in the house, and she made sure to secure the barn and the smaller pastures at night. She'd lost a few calves to predators over the years, a painful but inevitable part of ranching life. She respected the wild creatures, understood their need to survive, but she also knew she had to protect her own. It was late summer, the days growing shorter, the nights cooler. The air held a hint of autumn, a crispness that signaled the coming change of seasons. Margaret had been noticing some unusual signs around the ranch, small things that, on their own, wouldn't have raised any alarms, but collectively, created a nagging sense of unease. She'd found tracks near the barn, larger than coyote tracks, but not quite the size or shape of wolf tracks. She'd dismissed them at first, thinking perhaps it was a large dog, a stray that had wandered onto her property. But then, she'd noticed Buttercup acting strangely. The cow, usually placid and content, was becoming increasingly nervous, restless. She would often stand by the fence, staring out towards the hills, her ears twitching, her nostrils flaring. She would moo softly, a low, anxious sound that Margaret had never heard before. One morning, Margaret found a series of scratches on Buttercup's flank, long, shallow rakes that looked like they'd been made by claws. They weren't deep, but they were clearly visible, and they worried Margaret. She'd examined the wounds carefully, cleaned them with antiseptic, and applied a soothing ointment. She'd initially attributed the scratches to a barbed wire fence, or perhaps a thorny bush. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, something more sinister. She started to keep a closer watch on Buttercup, observing her behavior, monitoring her movements. She noticed that the cow seemed particularly agitated in the evenings, just after sunset. She would pace along the fence line, her eyes fixed on the darkening hills, her body tense with apprehension. Margaret felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling of fear that she couldn't quite explain. She was a woman of the land, accustomed to the challenges and the dangers of rural life. But this was different. This was a feeling she couldn't shake, a sense that something was lurking in the shadows, something that was threatening her peaceful existence, her connection to the land, and the well-being of her beloved cow, Buttercup. Margaret's concern for Buttercup deepened with each passing day. The scratches, though healing, were a constant reminder of a potential threat. Buttercup's anxious behavior, particularly in the evenings, continued unabated. Margaret found herself spending more and more time watching the cow, observing her from the kitchen window, from the porch, from the barn door, trying to decipher the source of her distress. She confided in Cody, the young ranch hand who helped her with the heavier chores. Cody, a quiet, observant young man with a deep respect for the land and its creatures, listened patiently to Margaret's concerns. "Could be a mountain lion, ma'am," Cody said, his voice thoughtful. "They're known to roam these parts. Though they usually go for deer or elk, a calf is an easier target. A grown cow, though, that's less common." "Buttercup isn't just any cow," Margaret said, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. "She's strong, and she's smart, and she's always been healthy." "I know, ma'am," Cody replied gently. "But a mountain lion is a powerful predator, and if it's hungry, or if it's got cubs to feed, it might take a chance." They discussed possible solutions. Reinforcing the fences, installing brighter lights around the barn, even getting a guard dog. But Margaret was hesitant. She didn't want to turn her ranch into a fortress. She wanted to find a balance, a way to protect her livestock without destroying the natural beauty of her surroundings. "I think we need to know for sure what we're dealing with," Cody said. "I've got a trail camera, one I use for tracking deer. We could set it up near the barn, see if we can catch whatever's bothering Buttercup on film." It was a logical suggestion, a way to gather evidence without resorting to drastic measures. Margaret agreed. Cody returned the next day with the trail camera, a small, weatherproof device designed to be strapped to a tree or a fence post. It was equipped with motion sensors and infrared night vision, capable of capturing images and videos in complete darkness. They carefully positioned the camera near the barn, focusing it on the area where Buttercup usually grazed in the evenings, and where Margaret had found the suspicious tracks. They set it to record video, hoping to capture a clear image of whatever was disturbing the cow. The first night, the camera recorded nothing but the usual nocturnal activity: a family of raccoons raiding the garbage cans, a skunk waddling across the yard, and all perched on a fence post. Buttercup appeared calm, grazing peacefully in the pasture. Margaret felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she'd been wrong. Perhaps it was just a stray dog, or even just Buttercup's imagination. But the second night, everything changed. Margaret and Cody reviewed the footage together, sitting at Margaret's kitchen table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The initial hours of the recording were uneventful, showing only the quiet stillness of the night. Then, at approximately 3 a.m., the camera detected movement. A dark shape emerged from the shadows at the edge of the pasture. It was large, low to the ground, and moving with a fluid, almost silent grace. It was a mountain lion. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Cody leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowed. The mountain lion approached Buttercup, who was standing near the fence, her head raised, her ears pricked. The cow seemed alert, but not panicked. The mountain lion stopped a few feet from Buttercup, its body tense, its tail twitching. It stared at the cow, its eyes gleaming in the infrared light. For a moment, the two animals simply stood there, facing each other, a silent standoff between predator and prey. Then, the mountain lion did something unexpected. It lowered its head, almost as if in a bow, and let out a soft, rumbling sound, a sound that was more like a purr than a growl. Buttercup responded with a low moo, a sound that was not a sound of distress. "It is a reply." The mountain lion then turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows from which it had come. Margaret and Cody stared at the screen, speechless. They replayed the footage several times, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. "I don't understand," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "It didn't attack her. It just looked at her. And that sound. It didn't sound aggressive." Cody shook his head, equally puzzled. "That's not typical mountain lion behavior, ma'am. They're ambush predators. They stalk their prey, then attack with speed and surprise. They don't usually just walk up to a cow and then walk away." The footage had confirmed their suspicions that a mountain lion was visiting the ranch, but it had also raised more questions than it had answered. Why wasn't the mountain lion attacking Buttercup? What was the meaning of that strange interaction? What were they going to do about it? The initial shock of seeing the mountain lion on camera was now replaced by a deeper, more perplexing mystery. They had identified the predator, but they had no idea what its intentions were. And that, in some ways, was even more unsettling. The trail camera footage, while confirming the presence of a mountain lion, had deepened the mystery surrounding Buttercup's nighttime visitor. The encounter, far from the expected predator-prey dynamic, was unsettlingly peaceful. Margaret and Cody replayed the video countless times, scrutinizing every frame, searching for clues that might explain the unusual interaction. "Look at its body language," Cody pointed out, pausing the video on a frame where the mountain lion was lowering its head. "That's not an aggressive posture. It's almost submissive. And that sound, it's more like a chuff, a greeting sound, than a growl." Margaret nodded, her brow furrowed. And Buttercup? She wasn't terrified. She was alert, yes, but not panicked. It's like they know each other. The idea seemed preposterous. A wild mountain lion, a creature of instinct and predatory drive, having a friendship with a domestic cow. It defied all logic, all conventional wisdom about animal behavior. They decided they needed expert advice. Cody suggested contacting Dr. Emily Carter, a wildlife biologist with the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife, who had extensive experience with mountain lions. Dr. Carter, a woman in her early 40s with a calm, authoritative demeanor, agreed to visit the ranch and review the footage. She arrived the next day, equipped with a laptop, binoculars, and a wealth of knowledge about mountain lion behavior. They showed her the video, explaining the context, Buttercup's unusual behavior, and the scratches Margaret had found. Dr. Carter watched the footage intently, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "This is unusual," she said, after viewing the video several times. "Highly unusual. I've never seen anything quite like it." She explained that mountain lions are typically solitary animals, highly territorial, and opportunistic hunters. They prey primarily on deer and elk, but they will occasionally take livestock if the opportunity presents itself. A healthy adult mountain lion would normally see a cow like Buttercup as an easy meal, Dr. Carter said. The fact that this one isn't attacking, it suggests something is inhibiting its predatory instincts. She examined the footage more closely, focusing on the mountain lion's physical appearance. It's a young adult, probably female, based on its size and build. She looks to be in good condition, well-fed, no obvious injuries. That makes it even more puzzling. She then asked Margaret and Cody a series of questions about the ranch, the surrounding area, and any past encounters with mountain lions. She listened carefully to their answers, taking notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. "There are a few possibilities, Dr. Carter said, after a lengthy discussion. One is that this mountain lion was orphaned at a young age and somehow imprinted on cattle. Perhaps it was raised near a ranch, or even fed by humans, which would explain its lack of aggression towards Buttercup." She paused, then added, "Another possibility is that this mountain lion has a past injury, something that makes it difficult for her to hunt her natural prey. She might be associating Buttercup with safety, with a source of food, even if she's not actively preying on her." "But the scratches on Buttercup's flank?" Margaret asked. Dr. Carter nodded. "That's the tricky part. It's possible those were accidental, a result of the mountain lion trying to play or interact with Buttercup. Or it could be a sign of frustration, a conflict between its instincts and its learned behavior." She emphasized that these were just theories, educated guesses based on her knowledge of mountain lion behavior. Without further observation, and ideally, a closer examination of the mountain lion itself, it was impossible to say for sure what was going on. "What should we do?" Margaret asked, her voice filled with concern. "I don't want to harm the mountain lion, but I also need to protect Buttercup." Dr. Carter considered this for a moment. "The best course of action, for now, is to try to deter the mountain lion from visiting the ranch without resorting to lethal methods. We can try installing brighter lights, motion-activated sprinklers, even noisemakers. We can also reinforce the barn and the pasture fences, making it more difficult for the mountain lion to access Buttercup. She also suggested that Margaret keep Buttercup inside the barn at night, at least for the time being, to minimize the risk of any further interactions. Margaret and Cody agreed to follow Dr. Carter's recommendations. They spent the next few days implementing the deterrence measures, working together to make the ranch as secure as possible. But deep down, Margaret felt a growing sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that there was a deeper explanation for the mountain lion's behavior, a secret hidden in the shadows of the night. She was starting to believe that the shocking reason for these visits wasn't about aggression, but something far more complex, far more profound. And she was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant challenging everything she thought she knew about the wild creatures that shared her world. Despite their best efforts to deter the mountain lion, the nightly visits continued, albeit with subtle changes. The brighter lights and motion-activated sprinklers seemed to make the lion more cautious, keeping it at a greater distance. Buttercup, now secured inside the barn each night, was less visibly agitated, but Margaret could still sense her underlying unease. The trail camera continued to capture footage, providing a growing archive of the unusual interaction between the two animals. The mountain lion, whom Margaret had started calling Shadow, and a nod to Mrs. Davison's name for the stray dog, would often approach the barn, sit outside, and simply look at the closed doors. There was no attempt to break in, no sign of aggression, just a quiet, persistent presence. One night, the camera captured something truly extraordinary. Buttercup, inside the barn, was standing close to a small window, her head pressed against the glass. Shadow was outside, sitting directly in front of the window, her gaze fixed on Buttercup. They remained like that for nearly an hour, two creatures from different worlds, separated by a thin pane of glass, yet seemingly connected by an invisible bond. Margaret watched the footage, her heart filled with a mixture of wonder and bewilderment. This wasn't predator and prey. This was something else entirely. This was a connection, an understanding, that defied all logical explanation. Dr. Carter, when shown the footage, was equally astonished. "This is remarkable, Margaret," she said, shaking her head. "I've studied mountain lions for years, and I've never seen anything like this. This goes beyond imprinting, beyond learned behavior. This suggests a level of empathy, of social interaction, that we rarely see between wild predators and domestic animals." She theorized that perhaps Shadow had experienced some sort of trauma in her past, a loss or a separation that had made her unusually receptive to forming a bond with Buttercup. Perhaps Buttercup reminded her of a lost sibling, or even a parent figure. "It's also possible," Dr. Carter added, "that Shadow is simply a unique individual, a mountain lion with an unusually gentle temperament, a creature that defies our expectations." Margaret found herself increasingly drawn to Shadow, despite the inherent danger. She felt a growing sense of empathy for the wild cat, a desire to understand her, to protect her. She knew that Shadow was a predator, a creature capable of inflicting serious harm, but she also saw in her as a vulnerability, a loneliness, that resonated with her own. She started to leave small offerings near the edge of the property, not food, but objects that she thought might be of interest to the mountain lion: a smooth, colorful stone, a piece of deer antler she'd found on one of her hikes, a small, brightly colored ball. She never saw Shadow interact with these objects, but they would always be gone the next morning. Margaret also started to spend more time observing Buttercup, watching for any subtle clues that might shed light on their unusual relationship. She noticed that Buttercup, while still cautious around Shadow, seemed to be less afraid, more accepting of her presence. She would often move softly when Shadow appeared, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to be a form of greeting. One afternoon, as Margaret was working in her garden, she heard a commotion coming from the barn. She rushed inside, her heart pounding with fear, expecting to find Shadow attacking Buttercup. But what she found was something far different. Buttercup was in distress, but not because of the mountain lion. She was in labor. Margaret, despite her years of experience with cattle, felt a wave of panic. She hadn't realized Buttercup was pregnant. She hadn't seen any of the usual signs. She tried to help, but Buttercup was struggling. The calf was positioned awkwardly, and Margaret knew she couldn't handle this alone. She called Cody, her voice frantic, and he arrived within minutes, his face etched with concern. They worked together, trying to assist Buttercup, but it was clear that the situation was beyond their capabilities. "We need to call the vet, Margaret," Cody said, his voice grim. "We need to get her to the clinic, or we're going to lose them both." Just then and there, Shadow jumped into the barn. Margaret felt very worried, but Shadow did not attack them. She walked to Buttercup and started to lick Buttercup. As they were desperately trying to reach the vet on the phone, something extraordinary happened. Shadow, who had been watching the scene from the edge of the woods, suddenly approached the barn. Margaret and Cody froze, their hearts pounding with fear. They expected an attack, a predatory move. But Shadow didn't attack. She walked calmly towards Buttercup, her eyes fixed on the struggling cow. She let out a soft, chuffing sound, the same sound she'd made in the trail camera footage. And then she began to lick Buttercup, gently, rhythmically, licking her face, her neck, her flanks. It was a soothing, nurturing gesture, a display of empathy and concern that was both shocking and deeply moving. Buttercup, who had been thrashing and moaning, seemed to calm down slightly under Shadow's ministrations. She let out a low moo, a sound of relief, of trust. And then, with a final, powerful push, the calf was born. It was a small, wobbly calf, its coat still wet and slick. It lay on the straw, gasping for air, its eyes blinking in the dim light of the barn. Shadow, her task seemingly complete, backed away, watching the scene with intense focus. She made no attempt to approach the calf, no sign of aggression. She simply observed, a silent guardian, a witness to the miracle of birth. The vet arrived shortly after, examined Buttercup and the calf, and pronounced them both healthy. He was astonished by Margaret's story, by the presence of the mountain lion, by the unlikely assistance she had provided. "I've heard of animals helping each other," the vet said, shaking his head in disbelief. "But I've never seen anything like this. This is truly extraordinary." Margaret looked at Shadow, who was now sitting quietly outside the barn, her gaze fixed on Buttercup and the newborn calf. She felt a surge of gratitude, of awe, of profound respect for this wild creature, this unexpected ally. The unthinkable had happened, again. The mountain lion, a predator, had not only refrained from harming Buttercup, but had actively assisted her during a difficult birth. It was a testament to the complexities of nature, the unexpected ways in which creatures can connect, and the enduring power of empathy to transcend the boundaries of species. The birth of Buttercup's calf, with Shadow's unexpected assistance, marked a new chapter in Margaret's life, a chapter defined by a growing acceptance of the extraordinary, and a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. The event solidified the unlikely bond, not just between Buttercup and Shadow, but between Margaret and the wild mountain lion. The local news, of course, picked up the story. "Mountain lion assists cow in birth," the headlines blared, accompanied by blurry photos captured from Margaret's trail camera. The story went viral, attracting attention from wildlife experts, animal behaviorists, and the general public, all captivated by the tale of the unlikely interspecies friendship. Margaret, however, remained grounded. She knew that Shadow was still a wild animal, a predator, and that caution was paramount. She continued to secure the barn at night, and she made sure to keep a safe distance whenever Shadow was near. She also worked closely with Dr. Carter, the wildlife biologist, to monitor Shadow's behavior and to ensure the safety of both her livestock and the mountain lion. Dr. Carter, while still amazed by the situation, offered a slightly more nuanced perspective. "What we're seeing here, Margaret, is likely a combination of factors," she explained. "Shadow's past experiences, her individual personality, and perhaps even a hormonal influence, given that she's a female. It's possible she's experiencing a surge of maternal instincts, even though she doesn't have cubs of her own." She cautioned Margaret against anthropomorphizing Shadow, against attributing human emotions and motivations to a wild animal. "It's important to remember that Shadow is not a pet," Dr. Carter emphasized. "She's a wild predator, and her behavior can be unpredictable. We need to respect her wildness, and we need to maintain a safe distance." Margaret understood and agreed. She had no intention of trying to tame Shadow, or to turn her into a domestic animal. She respected her wildness, her independence, her place in the natural order. But she also couldn't deny the connection she felt, the unspoken understanding that had developed between them. As the weeks passed, a new routine emerged. Shadow continued to visit the ranch, usually in the evenings, but her visits became less frequent, less intense. She would often sit at the edge of the pasture, watching Buttercup and her calf, her gaze calm and watchful. Sometimes, she would let out a soft chuff, a greeting sound that Buttercup would answer with a low moo. Margaret, in turn, continued to leave small offerings near the edge of the woods, not as a way to lure Shadow closer, but as a gesture of respect, a way of acknowledging their shared space. One evening, as Margaret was sitting on her porch, watching the sunset, she saw Shadow emerge from the woods, followed by not a cow, but something else. Two small, furry creatures, stumbling and tumbling along behind her. Mountain lion cubs. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized that Shadow was a mother. It explained so much: her protective behavior, her initial caution, her eventual acceptance of Margaret and Buttercup. Shadow led her cubs to the edge of the pasture, where they sat and watched Buttercup and her calf grazing peacefully in the fading light. The cubs, playful and curious, explored their surroundings, pouncing on imaginary prey, chasing each other's tails. Margaret watched them, her heart filled with a sense of wonder and awe. She was witnessing something truly extraordinary, something that few people ever get to see: a wild mountain lion family, seemingly at peace with their human and bovine neighbors. It was a testament to the power of nature, to the resilience of life, to the unexpected ways in which creatures can connect, can coexist, can even, perhaps, find a measure of friendship in the most unlikely of circumstances. Margaret knew that this fragile peace might not last. The cubs would grow, their instincts would sharpen, and Shadow might eventually move on, seeking a new territory, a new life. But for now, in this moment, under the vast Montana sky, there was a sense of harmony, a sense of balance, a feeling that all was right with the world. Margaret had come to this ranch seeking solitude, seeking peace after the loss of her husband. And she had found it, not in the absence of wildness, but in its embrace. She had learned to live with the wild, to respect its power, to appreciate its beauty, and to accept the unexpected gifts it could offer. She had learned that even in the most remote corners of the world, in the most unlikely of encounters, there was always the possibility of connection, of understanding, of a shared sense of belonging. And as she watched the mountain lion family, silhouetted against the fading light, she knew that her life, her quiet, solitary life on the rocking H, had been forever changed by the presence of these magnificent creatures, by the unthinkable bond that had formed between a woman, a cow, and a wild mountain lion. The ranch, once a place of mourning for her husband, now represented a new profound connection.